One of the many key questions in ethics is the question of who counts and who doesn't. Kant turns to address this question, and he has a very sharp distinction. So, in regards of beings being ends rather than means, he has a very clear split. So rational beings, like he notes humans, and he's generous to include all rational beings, considering the possibility of non-human rational beings. He says they exist as ends in themselves, not merely as means to be used. And he believes that rational beings are required to regard other rational beings as ends, not just means. And we'll see more as to why he holds that view and his reasons logically for it. So rational beings are ends, not purely means. So what about everything else? Well, Kant has a very sharp division. So rational beings, which would be humans, have statuses as ends. Everything else are what he calls objects of the inclination. And these have mere conditional worth. So whereas rational beings have intrinsic value, because they're rational, everything else has mere extrinsic value. They are valuable because we rational beings value them. And he's very clear about this, that if the inclinations we had towards these objects did not exist, they would be without value. And so the worth of all objects acquired by our actions for him is always conditional. And what does this include? Well, this include things that are clearly objects in our normal use of the term, like sandwiches and rocks and dirt and stuff, but also includes animals. And for him, these beings have only relative value as means, and hence are, in his words, things. So essentially he splits the world clearly into people and things, a very sharp division. Other moral theorists, like for example Mill, allow a much broader acceptance. So Mill allowed obviously humans, but also considered all beings that can feel pleasure and pain to count, all of sentient creation. And other moral philosophers do allow, for a gradation of counting. But for Kant, it's very sharp. You're a person or you are a thing. So getting back to rational beings, people, rational beings for him are people. Why? Because their nature shows them as ends in themselves, which on his view must not be used only as means. So the existence of rational beings like us, we have worth in and of ourselves, not because we're useful for something. We are valuable because we are valuable, not because we are valued or not valued. So according to Kant, we are objective ends, and our existence is an end in itself. So great if you're a person, not so great for entities that are not people, like animals. Now, if you think that Kant is terrible to animals, we also have a article about that Kant, discussion that Kant did on animals. And his view is actually that we should be really nice to animals. In a way, it seems to contradict his view here, but he gives a pretty clever argument as to why, even though animals have no moral status on their own, we should still treat them really well. So why should we accept that rational beings have this worth? Well, what he advances is kind of an implied infinite reduction, infinite regress reductio argument that works basically like this. Suppose all value was contingent, that everything was valuable because of something else. So, it's valuable because we value it. And so everything has to be valued to be valuable. Well, this would result in our old friend, the infinite regress. Because you would say, well, why is this valuable? Well, because it's a means to an end. Why is this valuable? Well, it's a means to that end. Why is that valuable? It's a means to that end. And so it's all contingent. It's all, this is valuable because of something else. And if there was no, nothing that's valuable in of itself, this regress would go on forever, and there would be nothing of value. So, presenting the regress, concisely. So if everything is valuable because of something else, this would go off to infinity. It can't go into infinity, so there would be no value at all. Now, there are those who accept that argument. They can be seen as, value skeptics, applying that infinite regress argument and concluding that there is nothing of value. Kant, though, like other philosophers such as Aristotle, do stop the regress. They stop it by saying, well, there's something that has worth in and of itself, intrinsic value, and lucky for us, it's us. So that's his view of rational beings and non-rational beings. Kant continues his categorical imperitizing, which is not really a word, maybe it is, probably not, with what he calls the second formulation of the categorical imperative, the supreme practical principle. So what is it? Well, what he claims is this. If there is such a supreme practical principle, and again, for Kant, the use of the term practical is a bit misleading because we think of practical as, kind of useful in everyday, situations. In this case, though, he means essentially moral principle. And he claims, much like Mill, that this supreme principle has to be drawn from what is necessarily an end for everyone. You recall when Mill was doing his utilitarianism, he regarded, happiness as the end for everyone. Now, for Kant, it's going to be rather different. His foundation is not happiness, but the notion that rational nature exists as an end in itself. Put another way, rational nature has intrinsic value, as opposed to extrinsic. So what's his argument for this? Well, what he reasons is essentially a consistency argument. He claims, perhaps incorrectly, that every person necessarily sees their own existence as this, that they see their own existence as an end. They see themselves as a person, not a thing, as an end, not just a means to be used. And so, much like Mill did, Kant says that subjectively, this would be a principle of our action, that each of us see our own existence as an end and not just a means, that each of us is a person, I see myself as a person, you see yourself as a person, and subjectively he claims that's the subjective principle. Now, and he says this extends to everybody. So all of us see ourselves individually as people. But then he says, extended from this, much like Mill does, going from how my happiness is my happiness, your happiness is your happiness, so the happiness of all is the happiness of all. He extends this. He claims this makes it an objective principle from which we can infer this supreme practical law, he claims. And his reasoning essentially is that each person sees themselves this way, and to be consistent, we have to extend that to others. Because if I'm a person because I'm rational, I have to accept consistently that everyone else who's rational is also a person, or so he claims. So what is this practical imperative? Well, it's this. So act as to treat humanity, whether in thine own person or in that of any other, in every case as an end withal, never as a means only. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we have to treat other people not merely as means to ends, we have to respect them as ends. Does this mean that we can never use people as means? Well, no, because obviously there are many cases where we do have to do this, and morally so. So, for example, if you're at Publix and the person is doing the checkout and bagging your groceries, it's not wrong to have them do that for you, but you have to still respect them as as people. So it's okay to go to the store to get to assuming it's safe. I mean morally, to get your hair cut, etc. To have people do stuff, as long as you still respect them as people. Respecting that, treating them as ends, never as means only. So for Kant, as long as we still respect someone as an end and not use them just as a means, then it's morally okay. And as you might imagine, much of our world is based on violating that imperative, simply using people as means and not respecting them as ends. Now, Kant thinks that collectively we form what he calls the kingdom of ends, as opposed to the magical kingdom. So what is this kingdom? Well, it's not in a way a kingdom in the sense that we all have, passports from it and it has a flag and a song. The idea is that it's a kingdom you belong to, but until you've heard this, you probably didn't realize you belong to it. It's essentially the union of all rational beings in a system of common laws. And you may be thinking, but I don't recall being in, a union of different rational beings in a system by common laws. And again, he doesn't mean like a country like the United States or even like the UN. He means we form a kingdom of ends that all rational beings everywhere, presumably in the universe, belong to this. And he claims that it is by laws that the validity of ends is determined. So how do we do this? Well, here's how the kingdom kind of works. Part of it involves abstracting from all the personal differences between all of us and our private ends. He claims we can see all of this as ends combined into a systematic whole, that we have kind of a collective set of ends. And this for him would include each of us as rational beings, and also special individual ends we may have for ourselves. So we have a kingdom of ends. We get to be in it because we're rational, and it's made up of each of us, we're each an end, and of course we also have individual ends that we wish to achieve. Crudely put, the idea is that what we aim to do matters in this kingdom, that we are all people in this kingdom. So, at least on the face of it, it sounds like a pretty good kingdom because every rational being is an end and should not be treated as a means. Another interesting feature of this is as follows. Now, you really can't have a kingdom without rules and laws. So who are the lawmakers and rulers of this kingdom of ends? Well, the good news is we all are. It's like we're all members of the Congress or Senate or House of ends. And this is what many take to be his third formulation of the categorical imperative. And so the idea is this. We are the lawmakers. And how do we make these laws? Well, we apply the categorical imperative. So Kant takes this to be, people refer to it as the principle of autonomy. And he believes that the autonomy of the will is based on our freedom. And it's really important that we be the lawmakers. Why? And this is also why Kant rejects divine command theory. Because if our moral principles are based on external authority, like just God telling us, also if we were to base it on our own inclinations, just how we feel about stuff, like what we want or, feel, he says the will would not be free because we would be being told by someone else or would be being ruled by our desires. So he thinks that the moral law is not imposed from outside. So it doesn't come from God or, supernatural agencies. It's an expression of our own rational nature, as he claims. Basically, we're the lawmakers. And we're moral agents, and he claims we're bound by the moral law. So we're autonomous because we're the lawmakers, and it is up to us to decide the laws. So in this kingdom of ends, according to Kant, we're all autonomous. Our will is free. We are not compelled by anyone from the outside. We're not making the laws by our desires. Yet according to him, We all follow the same moral laws because, at least according to Kant, if we go through it rationally, using, of course, his categorical imperative, we'll end up with the same laws. And so we are all citizens of this magic kingdom of ends because we're rational beings, and we, through our reason, and of course Kant's categorical imperative, we make the laws. And sometimes, since we have free will, break the laws.